The glossy mahogany conference table reflected the overhead lights as Lynn sat with her hands folded neatly in front of her. At 43, she had spent nearly 2 decades at Whitman Financial, rising through the ranks to become one of their most trusted senior accountants. Today, however, she wasn't discussing quarterly reports or tax strategies. The 5 people staring back at her looked confused, as if she had just spoken in a foreign language. "I'm sorry, you want to do what?" asked Mr. Reynolds, the department head, removing his glasses to clean them, a habit Lynn knew meant he was stalling for time. "I'm taking a sabbatical to study piano," Lynn repeated, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. "I've already spoken with HR about using my accumulated leave. I'll be gone for a year." The silence that followed was broken by a poorly disguised snort from Diane, who quickly covered her mouth. "Piano," Mr. Reynolds said flatly. "You mean, like learning to play the piano? As in the musical instrument?" Lynn nodded. "Yes, that's exactly what I mean." "But you've never mentioned any interest in music before," said Patrick from accounting, his eyebrows nearly touching his hairline. "I've always loved it," Lynn replied. "I just never had the chance to learn." "Well," Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat, replacing his glasses, "that's certainly too unexpected. Most people your age take up gardening or travel photography, not beginning a musical instrument from scratch." The meeting ended with awkward handshakes and forced well-wishes, but Lynn could feel their eyes on her back as she left the room. The whispers started before she even closed the door. Back at her desk, Lynn opened her bottom drawer and pulled out the brochure for the Westlake Music Academy. She had carried it for 3 months, ever since she'd walked past the school one rainy evening and heard the most beautiful melody drifting from an open window. She had stood there in the drizzle, letting her grocery bag soak through, transfixed by the sound. Piano lessons? Is this some kind of joke? Lynn looked up to find Diane standing over her desk, peering at the brochure. Diane, with her designer clothes and perfect hair, had always treated Lynn with thinly veiled contempt. "No joke," Lynn said simply, putting the brochure away. "But you're an accountant. A good one. Why throw that away for—" Diane waved her hand dismissively. "This? I'm not throwing anything away. It's just a sabbatical." Diane leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Listen, between us, is everything okay? I mean, you're not having some sort of, She twirled her finger near her temple. "Midlife crisis?" Lynn supplied, her voice cool. "No, I'm perfectly fine, thank you." "If you say so." Diane shrugged, not bothering to hide her skepticism. "Just don't expect us to hold your job when you come crawling back after failing at your little hobby." The word hobby stung more than Lynn wanted to admit. As Diane walked away, Lynn could hear her already sharing the gossip with the marketing team, their laughter rippling across the open-plan office. That evening, Lynn sat in her expensive apartment, surrounded by the trappings of her successful career. The leather furniture she rarely sat on, the state-of-the-art kitchen where she barely cooked, the framed certificates on the wall that had once seemed so important. Her phone buzzed with a message from her younger sister. "Mom just called me freaking out. Are you seriously quitting your job to become a pianist? Have you lost your mind?" Lynn sighed. She had called her mother hoping for support, but should have known better. In her family, practicality always trumped passion. Her father had been an engineer who viewed anything artistic as a waste of time. Her mother had pushed her toward accounting because it was sensible and secure. Even now, 20 years after his death, Lynn could still hear her father's voice. "Music won't pay the bills." She didn't bother responding to the text. Instead, she opened her laptop and began searching for apartments to rent, something much smaller, much cheaper, and preferably within walking distance of the music school. If she was going to do this, she would need to drastically cut her expenses. The realtor looked dubious when Lynn explained what she was looking for. "But this is half the square footage of your current place, and in a much less prestigious neighborhood." "It's exactly what I want," Lynn insisted, signing the lease papers. The next few weeks passed in a blur of cardboard boxes and goodbyes. Her colleagues organized a farewell lunch that felt more like a funeral than a celebration. The card they all signed was filled with messages that read like condolences. "Hope you find what you're looking for. We'll be here when you get back to reality. Good luck with your interesting new direction." The most genuine note came from the office janitor, Hector, who wrote simply, "Music feeds the soul. Good for you." The day Lynn moved into her new apartment was also the day she sold most of her furniture. The sleek modern pieces that had filled her old place wouldn't fit in the studio apartment she'd rented. Besides, she needed the money and the space for a piano. The piano arrived the following day. It wasn't new or fancy. A second-hand upright with a few scratches on the dark wood, but the tuner assured her the inside was in excellent condition. As the movers positioned it against the wall, Lynn felt a strange mix of terror and elation. What if everyone was right? What if this was a colossal mistake? That night she sat on the bench and gently pressed one key, then another, listening to the clear, simple notes. She didn't know how to play anything yet, not even a simple tune. All she had was the name of a teacher, Mr. Chen, and an appointment for her first lesson the following day. Her first lesson was nothing like she had imagined. Mr. Chen was not the kindly, patient teacher she had hoped for. He was stern and exacting, his face rarely showing any expression except mild disappointment. "You hold your hands like you are afraid of the keys," he said, demonstrating the correct position. "The piano is not your enemy, but it is not your friend either. It is your mirror. It will show you exactly who you are." Lynn wasn't sure what that meant, but she nodded anyway, trying again to position her fingers correctly. "Why do you want to learn piano?" Mr. Chen asked suddenly. "And do not give me some answer about always loving music. Everyone loves music. That is not enough." Lynn paused, thinking carefully, because when I heard someone playing through an open window last spring, it made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. Maybe ever. It made me feel awake. Mr. Chen studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "That is a better answer. Now again from the beginning." The first weeks were harder than Lynn had anticipated. Her fingers refused to move independently. Her hands ached constantly, and the simple exercises Mr. Chen assigned sounded nothing like music. Meanwhile, her savings were dwindling faster than expected, and the text from her family grew increasingly concerned. "I drove by your old apartment building today," her mother wrote. "I still can't believe you gave up such a nice place for this experiment." Lynn ignored the message, focusing instead on the scales Mr. Chen had told her to practice. An hour later, her fingers cramping, she took a break and checked her email. There were several from former colleagues, including one from Patrick with the subject line, "Thought you might find this funny." The email contained a link to a social media post. Someone, Lynn suspected Diane, had secretly recorded her announcing her sabbatical in the conference room and added a mocking caption, "When your midlife crisis hits but you can't afford a sports car." The video had dozens of comments, most of them laughing at her. Lynn closed her laptop, her hands shaking. She walked to the window of her small apartment and looked out at the street below. It had started to rain, reminding her of that evening when she'd first heard the piano. For a moment, doubt crept in, cold and insidious. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was ridiculous. Maybe she should call Mr. Reynolds and beg for her job back. Then she turned and looked at the piano sitting in her apartment. Her piano. She walked over and sat down on the bench. Her reflection in the polished wood was blurry, indistinct. "The piano is your mirror," Mr. Chen had said. "It will show you exactly who you are." "Well," Lynn whispered to the keys. "Let's find out who I am." She placed her fingers on the keys and began to practice again, one note at a time, over and over, until the rain stopped and the street lamps came on, casting a warm glow through her window. Outside, a pedestrian paused, hearing the halting, imperfect sound of someone learning to play the piano, someone beginning, at 43 years old, to discover a new language, to speak with her hands what her heart had always known. 3 months into her piano journey, Lynn's small apartment had transformed. Music books covered the coffee table, sticky notes with reminders about finger positions decorated her mirror, and a metronome ticked steadily on the windowsill. But most noticeably, her hands had changed. Once manicured and smooth, they now sported calluses and short-clipped nails. She had started wearing Band-Aids on her fingertips after particularly long practice sessions. "Again," Mr. Chen said, tapping his pencil against the music stand. "And this time, feel the rhythm. You are playing like you are still counting spreadsheet columns." Lynn sighed and repositioned her hands on the keys. She had been working on the same piece for 2 weeks. A seemingly simple children's song that somehow turned impossible when she tried to play both hands together. "I'm trying," she said, a hint of frustration breaking through. Trying is not the point, Mr. Chen replied. The point is doing. In accounting, trying to balance the books is not enough. Either they balance or they do not. Same with piano. Lin bit back a sharp reply. Mr. Chen had a knack for using her former profession against her, yet she couldn't deny his methods were effective, if brutal. She started again, forcing her left hand to maintain the steady pattern while her right hand picked out the melody. Better. Mr. Chen nodded. The closest thing to praise he ever offered. Now once more, but remember, you are not just playing notes. You are telling a story. After her lesson, Lin stopped at the corner grocery store. As she reached for a basket, she noticed her hands were trembling slightly. A common occurrence after practice these days. A voice behind her made her turn. Lin? Lin from Whitman Financial? She found herself face to face with Greg, a former client she'd worked with for years. His eyes widened as he recognized her, then immediately darted to her changed appearance. The simple clothes, the unmade face, the worn canvas bag instead of her former designer briefcase. It is you. I almost didn't recognize you without the power suit. He laughed, but his eyes held concern. How have you been? I tried reaching you at the firm a while back, but they said you were on leave? I'm taking some time off, Lin replied, suddenly self-conscious about her plain appearance. Oh, Greg nodded, clearly waiting for more explanation. When none came, he continued awkwardly. Well, whatever it is, I'm sure you'll be back soon. That place isn't the same without you running the numbers. Actually, I'm learning to play the piano, Lin said, the words coming out more defensively than she intended. Greg blinked. The piano? Like music lessons? Yes, music lessons, she repeated, noticing how his expression shifted to one of poorly concealed amusement. It was the same look she'd seen on Diane's face, on Mr. Reynolds' face, on her sister's face. That mixture of disbelief and secondhand embarrassment. That's different, Greg managed, clearly struggling for something positive to say. Good for you, trying new things. I should get going, Lin said, gesturing vaguely toward the produce section. It was nice seeing you. You too. And hey, when you're done with this piano thing, give me a call. My new company could use someone with your financial expertise. He walked away before Lin could respond, leaving her standing there, basket in hand, face burning. When you're done with this piano thing. As if it were a phase, a temporary madness she would eventually recover from. Back home, Lin sat at her piano but didn't open her music books. Instead, she pulled out her phone and, against her better judgment, checked her email. She had been avoiding social media since discovering that video of her announcement, but curiosity got the better of her. There were several new messages, including one from her old office assistant with a link to another social media post. This one showed pictures of Lin's new apartment building side by side, with her old luxury high-rise. Captioned, "The price of chasing impossible dreams after 40. The comments were even worse than before. Midlife crisis hitting hard. From corner office to crazy cat lady in 3 months. Next, she'll be dyeing her hair purple and dating a 25-year-old. Lin scrolled through the comments, each one a small cut. But what hurt most was seeing names she recognized. People she'd worked with for years, shared lunches with, helped with their tax problems. She had thought some of them were friends. She put her phone down and placed her hands on the piano keys. Not playing, just feeling the cool ivory beneath her fingers. 6 months ago, these comments would have devastated her. Now they still hurt, but something had shifted. These people didn't understand what she was doing because they had never done anything like it themselves. The next morning, Lin arrived early for her lesson, hoping to get some extra practice time. The music school had several practice rooms available for students, and she often came before or after her lessons to use them. As she approached her usual room, she heard something that made her stop. Through the door came the sound of a child playing the very piece she had been struggling with for weeks. But unlike her halting mechanical rendition, this child played it with an easy grace, turning the simple tune into something genuinely musical. Lin stood listening, a lump forming in her throat. The child couldn't be more than 8 or 9, yet played with a naturalness that seemed impossible to Lin despite months of diligent practice. "That's Zoe," said a voice behind her. Lin turned to find Mrs. Park, the school administrator, smiling at her. "She's been playing since she was 4. Amazing, isn't it?" "Amazing," Lin echoed, feeling that familiar cloud of doubt descending. Mrs. Park must have read something in her expression. because she added, "But you know what's equally amazing? Adults who start from scratch. That takes a special kind of courage." "Or foolishness," Lynn said quietly. "No." Mrs. Park shook her head firmly. "Courage. Children learn without fear because they don't know enough to be afraid. They don't worry about looking silly or making mistakes. Adults have to overcome all that just to try something new." She patted Lynn's arm. "Room 3 is free if you want to practice before Mr. Chen arrives." That afternoon's lesson was particularly difficult. Lynn kept hearing Zoe's fluid playing in her head, making her own mistakes seem even more glaring. When Mr. Chen asked her to play a new piece at sight, she fumbled so badly that he put his pencil down with a sigh. "Perhaps we should stop for today," he said. "You are not present." "I'm sorry," Lynn said, closing the music book. I heard a child playing this morning. She made everything sound so easy." "Ah," Mr. Chen nodded. "And now you think you cannot do it?" "I've been practicing for months and I still sound like a beginner." "She's probably been playing for less time than me." "She has been playing since she could reach the keys," Mr. Chen corrected. "And her brain is young, flexible. Of course she learns faster." "Then what's the point?" Lynn burst out. "If I'll never be that good, why am I doing this?" Mr. Chen regarded her for a long moment. Then unexpectedly he sat down beside her on the piano bench. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the piano. When she nodded, he began to play. Not a complex classical piece as she might have expected, but a simple, haunting melody that seemed to fill the small practice room with something larger than music. When he finished, Lynn sat in silence, moved by the piece in a way she couldn't articulate. "I composed this," Mr. Chen said, "when I was 62 years old after my wife died. I'd been playing piano for over 50 years by then, teaching for 30, but this—" He touched the keys gently. "This was the first time my hands could say what my heart needed to express." He turned to look at her. "You ask, what is the point? The point is not to be good. The point is to have the language when you need it." Lynn thought about this on her walk home, turning Mr. Chen's words over in her mind. To have the language when you need it. She had always been good with numbers, with spreadsheets, with financial projections, but there were things numbers couldn't express, like the hollow feeling when she saw those social media posts, or the ache of realizing how little her colleagues had actually known her. That night, instead of practicing her assigned pieces, Lynn simply played. No music sheets, no metronome, just pressing keys to see what sounds emerged. It wasn't music, not really, just random notes strung together without technique or theory. But for the first time since she'd started, she wasn't trying to get it right. She was just letting her fingers speak. The next day, she arrived at her lesson with dark circles under her eyes but a newfound calmness. Mr. Chen raised an eyebrow when she told him she'd stayed up late experimenting with the piano. "Show me," he said. Nervously, Lynn played a small pattern she'd discovered, just a few notes that somehow sounded right together. Mr. Chen listened, then nodded. "Not bad. Now let me show you why this works." He spent the rest of the lesson teaching her basic chord theory, explaining the mathematical relationships between notes that made them harmonious or dissonant. As Lynn walked home, her mind buzzing with new knowledge, she realized something important. She had stopped caring what her former colleagues thought. Their mockery, their disbelief, it suddenly seemed small compared to the vastness of what she was discovering. For the first time in months, she didn't check her email or wonder what new jokes were being made at her expense. Instead, she hurried home to her piano, eager to see what her fingers might say next. 8 months into her piano journey, Lynn sat in the back row of the music school's small recital hall. The seasonal student showcase was underway, and she watched as a teenage boy finished playing a complex piece by Mozart. The audience applauded enthusiastically as he bowed and left the stage. Mrs. Park approached the microphone. "Next we have Zoe Chen performing Butterfly Etude by Chopin." Lynn sat up straighter as the young girl she'd heard months ago through the practice room door walked confidently to the grand piano. Zoe, who couldn't be more than 9, adjusted the bench with practiced ease, placed her small hands on the keys, and began to play. The music that filled the hall was astonishing. Nimble, delicate passages that rippled like water, building to powerful crescendos that seemed impossible from such a small person. Lynn watched Zoe's hands dance across the keyboard, her face serious with concentration but occasionally breaking into a small smile during particularly beautiful phrases. When Zoe finished, the audience erupted in applause. Lynn clapped until her palms hurt, moved not just by the girl's talent but by the joy evident in her playing. As the next student was announced, Lynn slipped out quietly, needing fresh air. Outside, the evening was cool and clear. Lynn walked slowly, replaying Zoe's performance in her mind. 8 months ago, hearing such playing might have crushed her spirit. Now, strangely, she felt inspired rather than defeated. She would never play like Zoe. That much was obvious. But perhaps that wasn't the point, as Mr. Chen had been trying to tell her all along. The next day at her lesson, Lynn mentioned attending the recital. "Zoe is your granddaughter, isn't she?" she asked, having noticed the shared last name. Mr. Chen nodded. "Yes, she has great talent. She's amazing," Lynn agreed. "I can't imagine ever playing like that." "You won't," Mr. Chen said bluntly. "But that is not your path." Before Lynn could feel the sting of his words, he continued. "Yesterday I had 2 students. Zoe, who has played since she was 4 and practices 4 hours daily. And a woman who began at 43 because music called to her soul so strongly, she gave up everything to answer." He looked at her intently. "Both paths have value, both require courage." He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a sheet of music. "I think you are ready for this now." Lynn took the paper. It wasn't a classical piece or an exercise, but something called "River Flows in You" by a composer she didn't recognize. "This piece is emotional," Mr. Chen explained, surprising Lynn with his choice of words. "Technical skill is only half of music. The other half is what you bring from your life." He tapped the sheet music. "Play the notes first. Then we will work on finding your story within them." For the next few weeks, Lynn threw herself into learning the new piece. Unlike the exercises in simple songs she'd been playing, this music spoke to something deeper. The melody was haunting, with a gentle, rolling left-hand pattern that reminded her of waves. She practiced until her neighbors knocked on the wall, then switched to her digital keyboard with headphones, playing long into the night. One evening, struggling with a particularly emotional passage, Lynn received a text from her sister. "Hey, stranger. Mom's worried about you. Says you never call anymore. Are you still doing that piano thing?" Lynn hesitated, then typed back, "Yes, still playing. Tell Mom I'm fine." "You know, it's not too late to go back to your job," her sister replied. "Nobody would blame you for admitting it didn't work out." Lynn stared at the message, feeling a familiar pull of doubt. Her savings had dwindled faster than expected. She'd started doing freelance bookkeeping work to make ends meet, but it wasn't sustainable long-term, and her sabbatical would officially end in 4 months. Mr. Reynolds had made it clear her position would be filled if she didn't return. She put her phone down without responding and turned back to the piano. As she played through the piece again, she found herself thinking about her old life. The steady paycheck, the respect of colleagues, the certainty of knowing exactly what each day would bring. Her fingers faltered on the keys as images from her former world collided with the reality of her small apartment and dwindling bank account. "Focus," she muttered to herself, starting the section again. But the notes felt mechanical, empty. The next morning, Lynn woke early and made a decision. Instead of practicing before her lesson, she walked to the park near her apartment. It was barely dawn, the air misty and cool. She found a bench overlooking a small pond and sat quietly, watching as the water reflected the gradually brightening sky. An elderly man with a small dog walked slowly along the path. A young woman jogged past, earbuds in, lost in her own world. 2 squirrels chased each other up and down a nearby oak tree. Lynn observed it all, letting the scene wash over her. What was she doing with her life? Was this piano thing, as her sister called it, really worth sacrificing her career, her savings, her security? Maybe everyone else was right. Maybe it was time to admit defeat and go back to the world she knew. As if in answer, a distant piano drifted through the morning air, someone practicing with their window open, just as she often did. Lynn couldn't identify the piece, but the sound carried clearly across the park, mingling with birdsong and the rustling of leaves. She closed her eyes, listening not just to the notes but to the feeling behind them. Whoever was playing wasn't technically perfect, but there was something genuine in the music, something that spoke directly to her heart. In that moment, Lynn understood something crucial. She had spent her entire life being practical, making the sensible choice, following the path laid out for her. Learning piano wasn't about becoming a virtuoso or impressing others. It was about finally choosing for herself, about finding her own voice after decades of silence. At her lesson that afternoon, something had changed. When Mr. Chen asked her to play the piece, Lin's fingers moved differently on the keys. The notes were the same, but the music that emerged was transformed, more fluid, more connected, more alive. When she finished, Mr. Chen was silent for a long moment. "What happened?" he finally asked. Lin struggled to explain. I stopped trying to play it correctly and started trying to play it truthfully." Mr. Chen nodded slowly. "Yes, this is the breakthrough. This is where music begins." He closed his lesson book. "For next week, continue with this piece. But now, instead of practicing technique, I want you to practice feeling. Play it when you are sad, when you are happy, when you are angry. Let the music change with your heart." That night, Lin pulled out her phone and, for the first time in months, opened the social media app where her former colleagues had posted those mocking videos. She scrolled through her feed, seeing updates from a world that now seemed distant. Diane had been promoted to the position Lin might have had. Patrick had posted photos from the company retreat. Mr. Reynolds was retiring at the end of the year. Lin felt a strange detachment, as if she were looking at the life of someone else. She navigated to her own profile and, after a moment's hesitation, posted a simple update. 9 months into my piano journey. Still learning. Still growing. Still exactly where I need to be. She put her phone away without waiting for responses and turned to her piano. As her fingers touched the keys, she felt something she'd been searching for all her life without knowing it. The pure joy of creation. Of expressing what couldn't be said in words. The following week, Mrs. Park stopped Lin in the hallway after her lesson. "I've been meaning to ask you something," she said. "We're planning a special recital in 2 months, adult students only. Would you consider performing?" Lin's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of playing in front of an audience made her stomach clench with anxiety. "I'm not ready," she said automatically. "Nobody ever feels ready," Mrs. Park replied with a smile. "But Mr. Chen suggested you specifically. He says you found your voice." Lin thought about the months of practice, the doubt, the mockery, the financial strain, and balanced it against the feeling she'd discovered at the piano, that moment when the notes transformed from marks on a page to extensions of her own heart. "What would I play?" she asked. "Whatever speaks your truth," Mrs. Park answered simply. That evening, Lin sat at her piano for hours, not practicing any particular piece, just playing. Sometimes following sheet music, sometimes improvising, letting her fingers find their own way across the keys. As the night deepened around her, she made her decision. She would perform at the recital, not to prove anything to her former colleagues or her doubting family, but because after 9 months of searching, she had finally found something worth saying. And music, imperfect, honest, hard-won music, was how she would say it. The weeks leading up to the recital passed in a blur of practice and preparation. Lin had chosen to play River Flows in You, the piece Mr. Chen had given her. But she'd also been working on something else in secret, a simple composition of her own inspired by her morning visits to the park. She hadn't told Mr. Chen about it yet, unsure if she would have the courage to play something so personal in front of an audience. As the date approached, Lin's anxiety grew. She practiced obsessively, sometimes repeating the same passage 50 times until her fingers moved automatically. Other times she would sit silently at the piano, visualizing the performance, trying to prepare herself mentally for playing in front of strangers. 2 weeks before the recital, Mr. Chen surprised her during their lesson. "Play through your piece as if you were at the recital," he instructed. "I will be your audience." Lin positioned herself at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. She made it through the first page before a wrong note threw her off completely. She stopped, flustered. "I'm sorry, let me start again." Mr. Chen held up his hand. "No, in performance there is no starting again. Continue from where you are." Lin tried to find her place, fumbled, and finally resumed playing, but her confidence was shattered. She rushed through the rest of the piece, making several more mistakes before finishing with a muddled final chord. "I'm not ready," she said, staring at her hands. "I can't do this." "What happened just now?" Mr. Chen asked. "I made a mistake and lost my place." "No," he shook his head. "You made a mistake and then you abandoned yourself." Lin looked up, confused. "When you play for others, mistakes will happen," he explained. "This is certain." The question is not whether you will make mistakes, but how you will respond to them. He closed the piano lid gently. For next week, I want you to practice making mistakes. Practice. Making mistakes? Lynn repeated. Yes, play your piece and deliberately hit a wrong note. Then continue as if nothing happened. Learn to forgive yourself immediately and move forward. It was perhaps the strangest practice technique Mr. Chen had ever assigned, but Lynn tried it faithfully. At first, it felt wrong, counterintuitive. She'd spent months trying to eliminate errors, not create them. But gradually, she began to understand. By intentionally making mistakes and continuing, she was training herself not to panic, not to get lost in self-criticism during performance. 1 week before the recital, a thick envelope arrived in Lynn's mailbox. Inside was a card signed by her mother and sister along with 2 airplane tickets. We wouldn't miss your first performance, the note read. See you Friday. Lynn sat on her couch staring at the tickets. Part of her was touched by the gesture, but another part was terrified. It was one thing to play for strangers who had no expectations. Quite another to perform for family who had openly doubted her choice. She called her sister that evening. I got your card and the tickets, she said. I don't know what to say. Say thank you, her sister replied with a laugh. Mom's been talking about nothing else for days. I think she's finally coming around to this piano thing. I'm not very good yet, Lynn warned. Don't expect too much. Hey, you gave up your fancy apartment and corner office to do this. We just want to see why. After hanging up, Lynn sat at her piano and played through her piece, trying to imagine her mother and sister in the audience. Would they understand? Would they hear what she was trying to say with the music? Or would they just count the mistakes? 3 days before the recital, Mrs. Park asked all the performers to come to the hall for a dress rehearsal. The small auditorium looked different from the stage, larger, more intimidating. Lynn was scheduled to play third, after an older gentleman who had been taking lessons for 5 years and a middle-aged woman who had played as a child and recently returned to the piano. When it was Lynn's turn, she walked to the grand piano, adjusted the bench, and took a deep breath. The empty hall seemed to hold its breath with her. She began to play, focusing on the feeling of the music rather than technical perfection. Halfway through, she hit a wrong note, a jarring discord that echoed in the quiet space. For a split second, panic flared, but then she remembered Mr. Chen's lesson. She didn't stop or apologize, just continued playing as if the mistake were simply part of her interpretation. By the final notes, she had forgotten the error entirely, lost in the emotion of the piece. When she finished, the small group of fellow performers applauded warmly. The older gentleman leaned over to Mrs. Park and said something that made her smile and nod. That was lovely, Lynn, Mrs. Park said. You've come so far in such a short time. The night before the recital, Lynn couldn't sleep. She lay awake, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. What if she froze on stage? What if she forgot the entire piece? What if her former colleagues showed up to mock her? Finally, she got up and went to the piano. Instead of practicing her recital piece again, she played softly, improvising gentle patterns that reflected her anxious thoughts. As her hands moved across the keys, she gradually felt her heartbeat slow, her breathing deepen. This was why she had chosen this path, not for applause or approval, but for moments like this, when music became a conversation between her heart and her hands. The day of the recital arrived with unexpected calm. Lynn's mother and sister came to her apartment that afternoon, bringing flowers and nervous energy. Oh, honey, this place is so cozy, her mother said, clearly trying to find something positive to say about the small studio. It's perfect for me, Lynn replied, surprised to realize she meant it. The tiny apartment had become home in a way her luxury condo never had. Her sister wandered over to the piano, touching the keys lightly. So this is it, huh? The reason for everything. Not the reason, Lynn corrected gently. Just the instrument. They arrived at the music school early. The recital hall was already filling with people, mostly family members of the performers, but also other students and teachers from the school. Lynn spotted Mr. Chen speaking with a group of parents looking unusually formal in a dark suit. Backstage, the adult students gathered in a small practice room, everyone dealing with nerves in their own way. The older gentleman played silent scales on his knees. The middle-aged woman kept checking her sheet music, though she was playing from memory. Lynn sat quietly, eyes closed, running through her piece in her mind. Mrs. Park came to usher them to the side of the stage. "Remember," she said kindly, "everyone out there wants you to succeed." "They're on your side," the recital began. From her position in the wings, Lynn could just see the audience. She spotted her mother and sister in the third row, looking expectant. And then, with a jolt of surprise, she noticed familiar faces scattered throughout the crowd. Hector, the janitor from her old office, who had written that kind note on her goodbye card. A few of the younger accountants she had mentored over the years. Even Mr. Reynolds was there, sitting stiffly at the end of a row. Before she could process this, the first performer finished to enthusiastic applause. And then the middle-aged woman was playing. And then Mrs. Park was announcing her name. "Our next performer is Lynn Zhao, who began her piano studies just 11 months ago. Lynn will be playing River Flows in You by Yaruma." Lynn walked to the center of the stage, the polished black grand piano waiting for her like an island in a sea of expectant faces. She sat, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands in her lap, taking a moment to center herself. The hall was completely silent. Lynn could feel every eye on her, could sense the curiosity, the skepticism, the support. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The first notes rose clearly in the hushed space. Lynn focused not on the watching eyes but on the feeling of each note, the way the melody seemed to pour from her fingertips. This was not about proving anything to anyone. This was about sharing something she had discovered, something precious and true. Halfway through, she realized she wasn't thinking about the notes anymore. Her fingers knew where to go, freeing her mind to simply feel the music. She thought about the past 11 months, the doubt, the struggle, the moments of pure joy when something finally clicked. All of it was there in the music, flowing through her hands into the piano, filling the hall with her story. When she reached the final section, Lynn made a spontaneous decision. Instead of ending the piece as written, she transitioned smoothly into her own composition, the gentle, questioning melody she'd been working on in secret. It was simpler than Yaruma's piece, more hesitant but undeniably hers. She played the last notes softly, letting them hang in the air like a question not quite answered. For a moment after she finished, there was complete silence. Lynn kept her hands on the keys, her head bowed, certain she had made a terrible mistake by changing the piece. Then someone began to applaud. Another person joined in, and another, until the whole hall was filled with enthusiastic clapping. Lynn finally looked up and saw her sister standing, tears streaming down her face. Her mother was clapping harder than anyone, beaming with unmistakable pride. And there in the back of the hall, Mr. Chen was nodding slowly, a rare smile on his face. As Lynn stood to take her bow, she caught the eye of Mr. Reynolds. He was clapping too, his expression a mixture of surprise and something that looked almost like regret. Their eyes met briefly, and Lynn smiled at him, not in triumph or vindication, but with genuine warmth. She had nothing to prove anymore, no reason to resent those who had doubted her. She had found her voice, and finally, they had heard it. After the recital, the music school's lobby buzzed with conversation and congratulations. Lynn stood somewhat dazed as people approached her, offering kind words and genuine praise. Her mother hugged her tightly, saying nothing but somehow conveying everything. "That was," her sister finally said, wiping away tears. "I had no idea. Why didn't you tell us you could play like that?" "I couldn't," Lynn said simply. "Not until today." Mr. Chen made his way through the crowd to stand before Lynn, his usual stern expression softened. "You changed the ending," he said. Lynn nodded, suddenly worried. "I'm sorry if that was inappropriate." "It was perfect," he replied. "The student becomes the composer. This is as it should be." He gave her a small bow and moved on to speak with other students. As the crowd thinned, Lynn was surprised to see Mr. Reynolds approaching awkwardly, looking out of place in his business suit among the more casually dressed music school families. "Lynn," he said, extending his hand. "That was quite something." "Thank you for coming," she replied, genuinely touched that he had made the effort. "I didn't expect to see anyone from the firm here." "Well, I must admit I was curious." "We all were." He cleared his throat. "Actually, that's partly why I came. Your sabbatical officially ends next month, and I wanted to discuss your plans." Lynn felt a strange disconnect, standing there in the afterglow of her performance. The corporate world of deadlines and spreadsheets seemed like a distant memory belonging to someone else. "I haven't decided yet," she answered honestly. "The position is still yours if you want it," Mr. Reynolds said, then added with uncharacteristic hesitation, "But I understand if you don't." Before Lynn could respond, Diane appeared at Mr. Reynolds' side, looking as polished and perfect as Lynn remembered. "So this is where you've been hiding," Diane said with a tight smile. "Quite the career change." Lynn braced herself for mockery, but there was something different in Diane's expression, a flicker of something that looked almost like envy. "I saw those videos online," Lynn said quietly. "The ones making fun of my decision." Diane had the grace to look embarrassed. I shouldn't have done that." "No," Lynn agreed. "You shouldn't have." An awkward silence fell between them until Lynn's sister called from across the room, waving her over to meet one of the other performers. "Excuse me," Lynn said. "I should go." "Think about what I said," Mr. Reynolds called after her. "We'd be happy to have you back." Later that night, after her mother and sister had gone back to their hotel, Lynn sat alone at her piano. The events of the day played through her mind. The nervousness beforehand, the strange calm that had come over her while playing, the unexpected connections afterward. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had tagged her in a new social media post. With some trepidation, Lynn opened the app. It was Patrick from accounting. He had shared a short video clip of her performance with the caption, "Remember when we all thought Lynn Jia was having a midlife crisis? Turns out she was finding her passion. Sometimes the bravest thing is starting over." Inspired. The comments below were overwhelmingly positive, so different from the mocking tone of previous posts about her. "Absolutely beautiful playing. Can't believe she only started a year ago. Wish I had her courage to pursue something new." Lynn closed the app, feeling a complex mix of emotions. There was vindication, yes, but also a strange sense of gratitude for the journey, difficult parts included. If they had supported her from the beginning, would she have pushed herself so hard? Would she have discovered the same depth in her playing? The next morning, she met her mother and sister for breakfast before they caught their flight home. "So what will you do now?" her mother asked, stirring her coffee. "Will you go back to accounting?" Lynn considered the question. "I'm not sure yet. My savings won't last forever." "You could teach," her sister suggested. "Piano, I mean. You're obviously good at it." "After just a year?" Lynn laughed. "I'm still a beginner myself." "Not a typical beginner," her mother pointed out. "Besides, sometimes the best teachers are those who remember what it's like to struggle." The idea stayed with Lynn after they left. Could she teach? The thought of helping others find their musical voice held a certain appeal, but she still had so much to learn herself. At her next lesson, she mentioned the conversation to Mr. Chen. "Teaching is a possibility," he agreed. "But not yet. First, you must go deeper into your own study." "I can't afford to keep going without some income," Lynn admitted. "My sabbatical is ending, and my old firm has offered me my position back." Mr. Chen was silent for a moment, his fingers steepled in thought. "There may be another way. Mrs. Park has been looking for an administrative assistant for the music school, part-time work, but it would include free lessons and practice space." "An administrative assistant?" Lynn repeated, thinking of her former corner office and executive title. "Yes," Mr. Chen said, watching her reaction carefully. "It would be a step down from your previous position, of course." Lynn thought about it. Working at the music school would mean a dramatic cut in pay and prestige, but it would also mean surrounding herself with music every day, continuing her lessons, and perhaps eventually teaching beginners. "I'd like to talk to Mrs. Park about it," she decided. The following week brought another surprise. Lynn received an email from a small local website that covered arts and culture in the city. Someone had sent them the video of her recital performance, and they wanted to interview her about her journey from corporate accountant to pianist. "Your story is inspiring," the email read. "So many people feel trapped in careers they've outgrown but fear it's too late to change. We'd love to share your experience with our readers." Lynn agreed to the interview, which took place at the music school. The reporter, a young woman with bright eyes and genuine curiosity, asked thoughtful questions about Lynn's decision to leave accounting, the challenges of learning piano as an adult, and her plans for the future. "Do you regret giving up your successful career?" the reporter asked. Lynn considered the question carefully. "I don't see it as giving up one life for another," she finally said. "I see it as bringing parts of myself together that had been separated for too long. The discipline and focus that made me a good accountant also helped me as a musician. And the creativity and emotional awareness I've developed through music would have made me a better accountant had I stayed that path." When the article was published, it generated more attention than Lynn had expected. Several people reached out, sharing their own stories of midlife reinvention or asking for advice about pursuing long-delayed dreams. One email particularly touched her. It was from a former client, a man who had built a successful business but had always talked wistfully about the photography he'd abandoned in college. "I saw your performance online," he wrote. "Last week I bought my first professional camera in 20 years. Thank you for the reminder that it's never too late." As Lynn's first year of piano study drew to a close, she made her decision. She called Mr. Reynolds to decline his offer, then accepted the position at the music school. The work was straightforward: managing schedules, handling registrations, answering phones. But being surrounded by music and dedicated students energized her in a way her corporate job never had. In the evenings, she continued her own practice, developing her composition skills alongside her technique. Mr. Chen had introduced her to music theory, opening up new possibilities for expressing herself through the piano. 1 year after her first recital, Lynn performed again, this time playing a piece she had composed herself. Titled simply "Beginning Again," it incorporated elements of classical structure with more contemporary emotional expressions. As she played the final notes, she looked out at the audience and saw several familiar faces from her old life, mixed with new friends from the music school. The worlds were no longer separate. They had become parts of a whole, just as she had. After the performance, a young woman approached her backstage, clutching a program nervously. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "I read the article about you last year, and it gave me the courage to sign up for lessons. I'm one of Mrs. Park's new adult students." "How are you finding it?" Lynn asked. "Hard," the woman admitted with a self-conscious laugh. "My fingers don't always do what I want them to, but when they do..." She paused, searching for the right words. "It feels like waking up, like I've discovered a new room in a house I've lived in all my life." Lynn nodded, recognizing her own journey in the woman's words. "Keep going," she said. "The room gets bigger the more you explore it." Later that night, Lynn sat at her piano in the same small apartment she'd rented at the beginning of her journey. She could afford a larger place now if she wanted. Her part-time work at the music school combined with a few accounting clients she'd kept on the side provided enough income. But she'd grown attached to the cozy space where she'd struggled and triumphed, where she'd taught herself to hear her own voice amid the noise of others' expectations. She played softly, improvising as thoughts and feelings moved through her. The melody that emerged was neither sad nor triumphant, but something more complex. A bittersweet acknowledgement of paths not taken alongside celebration of the one she'd chosen. Outside, the night was quiet except for distant traffic and the rustle of leaves in the courtyard. Lynn played on, her music joining the world's symphony of sounds, unique, imperfect, and entirely her own.